Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Donald Altman. He's a former Buddhist monk. He's a psychotherapist, and now he's an international mindfulness expert. He has 15 award-winning books, so I'm jealous. I just got my royalty check, and I owe him $3 this year. So I'm really jealous. And he hosts Pathway Radio and podcasts, and that's with Living Spiritual Teaching Project. What is that?
Well, the Living Spiritual Teachers Project was put together by a group at spiritualityandpractice.com. And so they looked at all the people who are out there in the world today that they felt merited to be profiled. A lot of people who've written books in different spiritual areas, different traditions, and they kind of put them all on their website. So I was very honored that they selected me for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Get a variety of different aspects of spirituality teachings.
Yeah, that's what they do, and they even have now a spiritual literacy program that they created that is kind of neat. And I'm a big believer, even in my work, even though I focus kind of on mindfulness, Peggy, and that's kind of what a lot of my books are about. I like to draw from different traditions as well, and I hope that informs my work. So, but I wrote my first novel, which is Travelers, which is kind of a departure for me, and most of my work is around themes of healing and wholeness and using mindfulness, getting into this present moment, how powerful that can be. But I thought I wanted to, share those ideas through a fictional story and really take people into the world of a psychiatric hospital. What's it like in there? And so it's very accurate, and I was inspired by One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, one of my favorite books and films, and I was kind of inspired by that. But I wanted to, kind of bring people into that world. And the story is about a psychiatrist, the main character, and he's experiencing grief. He has lost his daughter, and it's driven a wedge, that loss. And this happens in families all the time, doesn't it? Where if there's a loss, it drives a wedge between, the partners, and everybody experiences grief differently. And so he and his wife are being torn apart. The marriage is at risk now, and he's unable to heal himself. And here he is, a psychiatrist, right? His job is helping people heal. And he blames himself for not diagnosing his daughter's illness earlier on. And so he's really in a bad place. And then a kind of mysterious traveler comes to, he accidentally bumps into this mysterious traveler. Her name is Traveler Jackie, and she's a traveling pet therapist, and has a dog, this little spaniel that hangs out on her shoulder all the time. But he's a sentient canine. He seems to know everything that's going on. And she does all these kind of miracles and things that he can't understand. And he thinks he's losing his grip on reality, right? And then a young patient, a suicidal young man, comes to the hospital, and he starts having visions and connecting with this traveler. And so he doesn't know what to think. He's a very scientific-minded person. And one of the themes in this book is, in mental health, in the mental health field and mental illness, we get locked into a mechanistic way of looking at things. We're in a kind of, I think in our culture, we're in a stranglehold of a materialistic view of things, that if we can't see it, if science can't prove it, then it doesn't exist, right? And that never used to be that way. Well, so what I'm trying to show in this book is that we need to get out of the stranglehold of that mechanistic system. And so he is guided. Traveler Jackie becomes kind of like a shamanic guide, and I don't say whether she's an angel. She might be an angel, so that's up to the reader to decide. But she is an energy that is able to take him into new realms of consciousness and new ways of seeing things, where he actually enters what I call in the book, The Quantum Collective, and he's able to contact actually his daughter. He's shocked that he's able to go to these other realms. And what happens in the story was, I mean, he begins to heal, and it changes his relationship with his wife, and it's an inspiring story. I wanted to have something that was uplifting. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was kind of had an ending that was a pretty sobering type of ending. But this is a very hopeful book, and I think it's based in the truth that we really can. This material world is only one facet of who we are, and so I think it's important that we can expand our awareness. But how do we do that? So a lot of times we're filled up with thoughts, and so this is where mindfulness comes in. It's kind of kind of built into that traveler's book a little bit too. But this therapist in the story, this psychiatrist, he's so busy with his mind always going, reading journals, doing this, doing that, and it comes out he's afraid of looking at his grief. He's afraid of stopping and really feeling that grief, right? And I think a lot of us are that way. Our attention goes outward. We're looking at screens all the time, or looking at our phone, and how many of us really can sit and just take a breath, right, and reflect, or look at nature and just slow down a little bit. And I think that's when we do that, then we connect with these other realms. We can find something beyond ourselves, and that's why stillness is so important. One thing happened, there's a synchronicity that I want to share that happened when I was, as a result of this book. I had written the book, and in the book, the character goes on a kind of a shamanic journey. He goes to this wilderness area, and it's actually a real area here. It's maybe an hour and a half outside of Portland, Oregon, which is where I live. And so he goes out in this wilderness area, and he has this experience where he has an injury. He falls and has this injury, and some things happen. I don't want to give away the story, but months after I had written that book, I went hiking in that park, and I went to a part of the park that I had never been to before, which is where I had this event happen to this character. And I just thought I was making up what the terrain was and what it looked like in that part of the park. And as I was hiking, I fell in the same place where my character fell, and I sustained some of the same injuries that he had. Fortunately, my wife was there with me and was able to help me out, that my character didn't have the benefit of that. And as I was leaving, or I should say limping out, I realized that I was looking at the terrain and looking at there's a waterfall there and everything. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I wrote. I didn't even know this was here. And I had fallen in the same spot that character had fallen, and that was kind of amazing to me. But I think it was a synchronicity in a way for me to say, hey, there's a lot happening that we think is fiction that is also reality.
It makes you think about where we go, like it may be in another realm when we're in that creative space, and what we're picking up on. One time my daughter come home and she's like, I have to write a story and I don't know how to write a story. She's all upset, and the other kids went downstairs. And so I thought, well, I'll do it for you. I never usually did the homework, and I just typed up this story. I walked downstairs and they were watching, I can't think of the name of it. Unsolved Mysteries. And the exact same story just started playing.
Oh, amazing.
That
yeah.
I had right there in my hand. I had just wrote it. And I mean, there were some differences, but where the whole shower scene where this crazy guy he come in like to fix a cable, and somebody went postal, and this whole thing. I'm like, what in the world? And my kids look like, oh my God, Mom. So it makes me think, what we pick up when we're in that creative space.
Oh, yeah.
That's happened to somebody at some point.
Absolutely. And it's amazing, isn't it, to think that somehow we're connected. I think that somehow we're connected to everything. When this character enters this quantum collective, he's able to experience his older self and his younger self. It's like it's like time contains everything all at once, the past, the future, the present. And I actually have wondered how things in my life when I was younger, how did I know to do this at that particular time? Or why did I hear this message? Right. And I wondered, was it my future self telling me that? And I actually will send to the part of me that was struggling back when I was like in my teens and 20s. I will actually send that a positive intention and thoughts to that part of me, because I think we are connected. And I wonder if a future self is also helping me now.
Now, I'd like to go back in time a little bit. How did you become a Buddhist monk? Really
Oh,
curious.
well, that was out of really, when you think about, times that you make big changes in your life, it's probably because you're undergoing a lot of pain or something. And I was having a lot of suffering and repetitive things happening in my life that I finally, I had been to therapy and that was helpful, but I thought, I want to go more deeply. I want to start to look within and find out what is the root of these. I wanted to understand my mind better, so I didn't keep repeating some of these destructive patterns. And I had met a monk. Somebody said to me, somebody I knew said, "Hey, there's a monk I think you'd like to meet." And I was like, "Oh, well, okay." I wasn't so sure, but I met this person, and it was just a brief encounter. But he was a monk from Burma. His name was Uthilananda, and I didn't know it at the time, but he was a well-known teaching monk. Came to this country in the late 70s, and traveled all around, and was a well-regarded teacher. And but what struck me, Peggy, when I met him was this: I could feel the compassion and the openness that he had. I mean, it was palpable, and it drew you in. And I was kind of stunned by that, because I had never met anybody like that. I mean, he was so different from anybody. I mean, and I could just feel that. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. It was a tough neighborhood that I grew up in. You didn't find people like that, and it just so it's kind of a planted a seed for me. It's like, oh, I'd like to know what he knows. How did he get to be like that? And then not long after, one of these destructive patterns happened again, and I ended up losing my job and that I was working in at the time. And I found out that I could ordain as a monk with him as a head of the monastery. And I thought, how wonderful. I mean, I was scared to make a big shift like that, but I thought I need something I really felt I was drawn to and needed to do. And going in was really amazing, because you really drop your persona, you let go of all the baggage, or hopefully you do, and that you're given a new name in the monastery. And one of the first things they did was if you can see me now, you see I shaved my head, but I had a lot of hair when I went in, and the first thing they did was they had a straight razor and they shaved my head. And they held a lock of my hair up in front of me, and they said, the first lesson I got was, they said to me, "This is not you." I was like, oh, that's not me. This whole idea I have about who I am. And so it was kind of like a way of you almost deconstructing the ego. This is that we build up and we defend it, right? We build up this idea of who we are, we defend it. And that creates a lot of the dissent in the world. A lot of the problems that we have with ourselves and others is we are defending something. What if we were able to let that all go? And so it was a process in the monastery of starting to become friends with my mind, and starting to watch my thoughts, and starting to notice all the things that were old patterns or old belief systems that I was locked into, right? That I just thought, well, this is the way needs to be. Well, it's not the way it needs to be. And I was so able to, in a sense, get less attached to that. And that's one of the ways that, one of the things I learned in the monastery a lot of times is how attached we are to something. That can be the a cause of suffering and our pain, right? We need things to be a certain way, or we demand that other people do things a certain way, right? And instead of being more collaborative with them, more open to other ideas, and become less defensive. And so we can sit and we can start to listen to others in a more compassionate, kind, loving way. So I think that that was, very powerful for me. And what I learned from Uthilananda, that monk, the favorite thing he loved to do was to teach the loving kindness, the compassion practice. And so I had a lot of practice with that. And I think when we do that, it softens our heart, and we can become more tender, more vulnerable. Now, for a lot of people, that can be very scary, but I think what happens is when you're guarded, and I worked with clients as a psychotherapist where they had like an armor around their heart, but when that armor was there, they couldn't connect with other people really. Their relationships wouldn't work. They were, so guarded that when they were able to melt that away, they were able to live again, right? And love again. And so it was a very powerful experience for me. I wasn't in there for a real long period of time, but I think I think when you do something like that, it's how ready are you for the experience? And I was right. I was like an apple ready to fall off the tree. So it really impacted me, and it turned my life in a completely new direction. I always felt my work would be out here in the world. And in that tradition, you don't take a lifetime vow anyway. It's like kind of like, oh, I commit there to be there today, and the next day, yeah, I commit to be here today. And if you're ready to move on, there's a ceremony, a beautiful ceremony for you hand back the robes, and you move on with the next part of your life. But you also take some vows as you leave too, so you still have some level of commitment to doing the work and living a life where you hopefully produce less harm and are able to be helpful. So it was a very powerful experience for me, and I've been able to teach that loving kindness practice. It's in a lot of my books, and it's one of the things that the character in the story, he's very constricted. He can't connect with love, and yet his daughter, who died, she was one of the most loving persons he ever knew, and so this is part of his struggle, is learning how to open up, how to get into the present moment, and how to allow himself to be touched by feelings again. And I think it's something we all deal with. And then, and how to heal from grief. Grief is different for everybody. And then that's what I think is important about the book. We see that he's healing in a very different way from his wife, but it's important to respect your partner and realize that they're healing differently from you, not to judge them. Right.
Yeah, it makes me think of the movie What Dreams May Come.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It makes me think of Girl Interrupted and Patch Adams, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Those are really good examples of, when we judge, it's how harmful that can be. And I think there's just a little bit too much blame and shame in the world nowadays, and we need to, rather than blaming others, need to look at ourselves more, and need to soften ourselves more and find compassion and empathy for others. So, people have said to me, so where, I want to learn mindfulness, where do I start? And I like to say, start at your most difficult point. Start with your suffering. Start where you're struggling, right? If you're depressed, start with your depression. Start noticing the depression. Become friends with the depression, right? Or your anxiety, instead of trying to push it away and fight it, which means it's going to push back. We can start to understand it, start to know it. And
were you already a psychotherapist before you become a monk, or did you do that after?
No, I did it after. So that was the interesting thing. Yeah, that when I got out of the monastery, it turned my life in a completely new direction. I never could have predicted I started doing workshops on spiritual eating after I left the monastery, and people were coming up to me and they'd say, kind of whisper in my ear at the end of the workshop, "Oh, by the way, I have this anorexia problem," or "Oh, by the way, I have this bulimia problem," or binge eating disorder. And I was like, "Whoa, what is that? What do I do with that?" So I went back to school, and so I could work with people therapeutically. So in grad school and after, I worked in an eating disorder clinic, and that was an area for a while where I specialized in. So yeah, so it turned my life around, and then I started writing spirituality and self-help mindfulness books. So it was one of those initiations. Going into the monastery was really a spiritual initiation for me, and it turned my life in a completely new direction. I'm so grateful, and yet I could not have predicted. I didn't go in there to get a new career, right? I went in there to reduce my suffering and understand myself better. But the byproduct was that I hope it has helped a lot of people.
So I assume those books is what led to having the podcast and the radio program.
I'm sorry?
Having the books, did that make
Yeah.
you then the expert people felt you should do the podcast, or you did this yourself or in the
Oh,
radio program?
yeah. You mean Pathways Radio that I
Yeah.
do? So, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. Well, that program is one of Portland's oldest radio programs, and I was invited on that program back, I think it was 1998, when I wrote my first book, and I actually had written it, almost all of it, at the monastery, called Art of the Inner Meal, and it's a book about spiritual eating. And I went back then when they used to really do book tours. I went up to Portland and went to the studio, Pathways, and interviewed there. And I met the host, and we later became friends. When I moved up to Portland, I got to know him, and we became friends. And then there were two hosts. One of the hosts retired, and he asked me if I'd fill in, and then I became a regular host about a little over a year ago. So yeah, it was an interesting process, but it actually came through my books that I met him.
Certainly a different path than I'm sure you
Oh, it
foresaw in your
is.
future.
It is. And I want to say it's really interesting because I've been interviewed a lot, but then to sit in your seat as an interviewer, which, now that I'm hosting that show, it's a completely different experience, and it's a real skill to be able to be the interviewer. You really have to listen and be present with what's happening. Yeah, I always, there's more pressure, I think, sitting in your seat than in the seat of you're just being asked questions.
Oh, I don't feel that way. Like people
Oh,
interview
good.
me, I like feel the tension, but to interview others, I
Oh,
don't. I'm pretty
yeah.
relaxed because I just
Oh,
follow
that's
their lead.
interesting. Well, I want more of what you have then.
I was a child abuse investigator for years, and so I was
Oh,
interviewing people every day, all day about bad stuff. So this is
oh, wow.
nice to interview about nice things.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. That's great.
So what else do you think we should discuss?
Well, let me see. Um, I think that when it comes to healing, I think it's important to kind of think of your wholeness. I think we're all spiritual seekers, and I don't think we should put any limits on how we do that seeking. And sometimes, uh, when I was in my 20s, and I'll share this, Peggy, I had a major depressive disorder. So, I mean, I think one of the things that drew me into the field also was that having been wounded myself, having experienced trauma, um, I had this major depression. I was lucky. I had a really wonderful therapist. He was a psychiatrist back then. And around that time, I I started to experience some out of body um, awareness, and it was, for me, that was really a spiritual initiation. Now, here I was mired in pain and depression in my life, And yet I got a glimpse of something beyond that. And it was almost as if um, the universe was saying to me, hey, you're more than this. You know, this life that you lead and this trauma you've had, you're more than that. That's part of your experience, is helping you to grow. But here, we're going to show you that there's more. And so um, I think, you know, it's okay for us to experience pain that we feel. I think it was Leonard Cohen, who, you know, there's a songwriter who said, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, right? And so we can be cracked or broken in some way, but that's also our brokenness is also our path to greater understanding and light and healing. So my message, I think, to everybody would be, hey, look, you know, we're all in some way experiencing loss. If you're on this planet, if you're in a human body and you have a human mind, you're going to experience loss, you're going to experience grief, but that's also the gift, right? And so we can recognize that, and while we're here, we can try to reduce the suffering of others. And I think that's a story that the lesson maybe that my character learned at the end of the book is that we're all travelers in a sense, right? We're all travelers. We don't know where we came from. It's a mystery. Here we are. We you know, may have a sense of where we're going, but it's still a great mystery. But we do know that while we're here, we can try to be helpful to the other travelers we meet along the way. You know, if you're in another country and you're traveling, or you're out of your hometown, sometimes you need directions. Sometimes you need some help from somebody who's in that new locale, right? Little guidance. And so we can be that for other people in our lives.
A lot of NDEers, and myself included, after our NDE, we are often aware of this, I don't know, it's guardian angel or the voices that come and guide us. And you know, then once you start to have it and realize it and accept it, you realize maybe even before your NDE that was there, but you just dismissed it. And it just kind of opens you up more to the reality of it, and become very useful if you learn how to know that fact from fiction.
Yeah, I had an experience. I was in Los Angeles and I was near the airport, and I was walking behind this hotel and I had an odd feeling. All of a sudden it came into my head that, wow, what if somebody is so dark back? What if somebody attacked me back here? What if I was, you know, robbed back here? And then I saw a car about way down, you know, at the end of the block, and the lights went on. I said, wow, what if it was that car? What if those people came here and did this to me? And why did that come into my head, right? But that's exactly what happened. That car drove up, guy jumped out with a big knife, butcher's knife, and, you know, holding it up right in front of my face. Give me your money, you know, and I heard a voice, and it said, throw your wallet. And it wasn't me. It was like, and I took my wallet and I threw it in one direction. I ran toward my car in the other direction. And, you know, in that moment, I could have tried to run. I could have tried to maybe, you know, I even felt that fight or flight thing kick in where you know, but that voice. And I've often wondered, what was that guiding voice, right? So I think in some ways, yeah, we need to tune in to these things, and they might seem miraculous, but maybe they're just us connecting. Maybe there is a helper, a guide, or an energy there with us. So what do you think about that?
Well, like, you didn't hear, I need to throw my wallet. You heard someone say, you need to throw your
Yeah,
wallet.
right.
So I think there lies the difference when we're trying to decipher, is this just my imagination, or is someone talking to me here? And I think that's a clue. Because I realized I would argue when I'd hear that voice, I would start arguing with it. And I'm like, and I catch myself, who are you arguing with? You know,
Mm-hmm.
because it was outside of me. It
Yeah.
wasn't me, like you say, it was something outside of you.
Yeah.
And that's the connections we have when we have near-death experiences. We get this telepathic communication, and it's really no different other than we're alive, or we might be in a
Mm.
death situation, but we could be harmed, or, something that really scares us, or, in that
Yeah.
fight to flight mode or whatever.
Yeah. I think what's important is to stay open, right? To
Yeah.
stay open to these experiences.
Yeah.
And at the same
Because,
time, we need to go through life. We need to, be practical in our lives and
yeah.
pragmatic and take care of ourselves and, do self-care and all that kind of stuff too.
When I was 25, I had lost twins and had an NDE, and I got real depressed afterwards. And to handle my depression, I noticed I had started drawing house plans. I was getting ready to build a house, and like 5 hours ago in like 5 minutes. And I kept returning to that every day because it was a relief, kind of like a band-aid on
Yeah.
time to let me get through and heal. And years later, I was realizing every time I would get depressed, I would start drawing house plans again, and we'd start
Mm.
building on the house. and and so a few years ago, I stepped out early one morning to walk the dog, and all of a sudden, when I stepped off the porch, I heard this voice say something like, creativity is God's rescue. He don't give us like more than we can handle. He gives us creativity so we can
Mm.
use that like to heal ourselves. And I turned around when I was coming back with the dog, and I seen how huge my house is, and I thought that's a lot of depression, because I used my creativity to, and so my house grew as it was like almost like an artist, putting
Oh,
their heart into, a project. And mine
yeah.
was my house. And so I just kept adding, because every time I started drawing, my husband knew he's going to be asked to build something. So it
That's
ended up
funny.
being a
Is he
screaming house.
hiding all the pencils and the art supplies?
Yeah, he knows when I start picking that stuff up. Oh no, what do I have to do now? But yeah, but I mean, it helped me heal. I would just sit and draw
Yeah,
because it really took my mind on that and just removed everything. It was a break for a while from the
that's
trauma.
great. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, everybody needs to find what that is for them.
Yeah,
Somebody
I
might,
feel, bad people turn to drugs or alcohol, those kind of things,
yeah,
or sex addictions or anything,
yeah,
because there's so many other ways that we can just get creative and lose our mind that way, whether it's dancing or, art or some kind, or whatever kind of
yeah.
tinkering, people like to do.
Oh, gosh, you're absolutely right. I think that so many people are medicating away their troubles when they could do it in a more creative, helpful way.
Yeah. Or even like helping people, like, when you was in the monastery and you were learning compassion and those kind of things, how to go out of ourselves and help other people. And that takes our mind off ourselves.
Absolutely. I think if you're lonely, the best thing to do is to find somebody, help somebody who is lonely. Find
Mm-hmm.
another lonely person and help them.
Yeah. So what's your
But
next project? What are you working on now?
well, gosh, I've always working on something, and uh, I have an idea for a sequel to this for Travelers, and it's funny because people have already asked me, so when are you going to write the sequel? So I'm thinking of some ideas for that, and I write a blog for Psychology Today that to do that, and so it's kind of interesting. My work's kind of changed a little bit, but I think I'll always write books. I love writing, and like you say, you sit down and write, time disappears, and sometimes I'll look back at what I've written, and I'll think, how did I do that? Was that me, or did it somehow come through me? I mean, it's an interesting, and I think maybe that's why we lose the time. It's just a flow from the source it's coming through. So it's a to have that creativity is really what it makes being human very special, doesn't it?
Yeah, I only wrote one book, and I didn't even plan on writing it. I was just going to put it away in a drawer somewhere. Yeah, I never thought I'd publish it, but that's the way it went. But so I would read parts to my husband. It's just my memoir, and I'd read
Yeah.
parts to my husband. He'd say, "Who are you, and what did you do with my wife?" It's like I don't talk like that, When I write,
Oh,
it
yeah.
comes out so differently than I was like I was finding my voice by writing that I couldn't speak.
That's really interesting. I have known some writers who actually speak like they write. I'm not one of those. I wish I could speak like I write. The writing comes through me, like you're saying, in a completely different kind of way, and it just flows. When I'm speaking, I'm a little more halting. I'm trying to think what I'm going to say, and it's different. But I've always kind of thought how great it would be to be one of those writers who could speak just how they wrote. And some people do. It's interesting.
Yeah, there was some song in the 70s back when I was a teenager. I was going through my depression. It's like, stand tall, don't you fall, don't you go and do something foolish, something you might regret later. And I just resonated with that song because I became very proud as a teenager. Like when
Mm,
my stepdad would beat on me, I would say, oh, in my mind, I would go to these places. Oh, come on, big man, beat on a little girl. And so I had
mm,
this tough exterior, and I walked around with that. But then when I wrote, I didn't have that. I could just really pour out my feelings and
yeah.
go to places I never let myself go. And it was just so different.
Well, that's the beauty of, I think, what writing can do. And I've loved books, Peggy, since I was a kid. I remember in grade school, once a year, they'd have a book fair and bring in these books, and it would just take me to these other worlds. And I just remember seeing these, and I wanted to buy all the books. My mom was like, no, we can't. You can buy one book. Right. But I was just enamored with books. So to me, to be able to write books and to talk about books and ideas like this really makes it come full circle to me that um, I feel very blessed that I've been able to do that. I think your book is a blessing because you weren't even thinking you were going to write a book, and yet you were able to share something of value with others.
Yeah, I remember at one point writing, and I stopped and I sat back and I cried tears for myself. And I
Hmm.
thought, how did my mom do that? Why would my mom do that? And oh my gosh, I was just sitting on that bed, loving my mom as a kid, waiting for her to come in and kill me. And it's like I processed it then. It's like before, when I would tell somebody, oh yeah, this and this happened, it was like I was reading all these abuses down like a child, like a checklist,
Hmm.
like grocery store list. Like, oh yeah, da 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 da. There was never any feeling. I never processed it, never felt it. And sometimes I'd be writing, I would just like crying for this girl, like she's
Hmm.
a character in this story and not me, but
Yeah.
she was me. And it helped me heal because I was able to separate who she was, who I am now, instead of just carrying all this baggage around. So I don't know, this can be really healing. I think a lot of times people come on my show and I'll ask them, have you read your book? Have you thought about it? Because I really think you would, you know, heal a lot, or, you have something to share that other people would, benefit by. A lot of people's never even thought about it. One girl here recently, I asked her, she's like, no, I haven't. I thought about it, but I don't know how. And someone contacted me in an email and wanted to write her story.
Oh,
An
wow.
author wanted to reach her. She's going to write her
Cool.
story for her free of charge, she said.
Wow.
So that was exciting.
Yeah,
So,
that's very neat. Yeah.
yeah. Now, your other books, there were on mindfulness, and tell me about the mindfulness movie. Now, someone played you in that. Is that right?
No, 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 that's me.
That's you in it?
That's
Okay.
an
I just happened to
actual,
check it a little bit. So,
yeah, that's an actual, that was on Amazon for a while. I don't know if it's still, I'm not sure where it's streamed right now, but it was the mindfulnessmovie.com was the website. Um, anyway, so this guy, Paul Harrison, really interesting guy. He was the director, and he got together all these mindfulness teachers and different people and really wanted to explain what mindfulness is. And there's an area on mindful eating, there's an area on mindfulness in the brain, there's an area on mindfulness in schools, mindfulness in veterans and trauma, stuff like that. And so yeah, I was just very fortunate that he called upon me. So I was one of the experts that he interviewed, that's interviewed
cool.
in this movie. So it was really fun.
That's very cool.
Yeah, so I think you can still find clips of that, and maybe it might still be on one of the streaming platforms. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Now, what does mindfulness mean?
Well, you know what? That's a great question. A lot of people don't ask that. Mindfulness, the original term for mindfulness, sati, it's a Sanskrit word, means self-recollection and self-remembrance. So it's kind of like bringing all the fragmented parts of ourselves together. Now, as the Buddha originally taught it, there was something known as the four foundations of mindfulness. So it was being aware of mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of sensations as they're experienced in the mind, mindfulness awareness of your thoughts and your conscious processes, and then awareness. The fourth one was awareness of phenomena, how things arise and fall. So impermanence, things come and they go. So nothing's really the same all the time, right? Everything's kind of, our thoughts come, they leave. We age, we grow, we're born, we die. So everything's changing. And that's an important lesson actually in the Buddhist practice, is that if you notice impermanence, you don't have to permanently get attached to things and, you know, I've got to keep that house, or I've got to get, holding onto things, grasping onto things. But because they're impermanent, you can also learn how to accept and let go. And so it's an important concept. So anyway, that's a traditional mindfulness. As it's taught in this country, mindfulness is often, as I work with it with clients, it's a way to find self-compassion, self-acceptance, a way to open up more to the moment, not be lost in the future, or not be lost in anxiety, or not be lost in depression, not be lost in the past. And there's actually research that shows that you, even with people who've experienced PTSD, right, that they can get very present and volitionally bring their selves back to this moment where they can say, hey, no, I'm safe here, instead of replaying the old tapes of trauma, right? So being in this moment is really where everything's happening for you, right? And you don't have to, you could plan about the future, and pleasant planning is good. But if you're stressed out about something, or you're anxious or worried about the future, or thinking about the past, that actually ages you more quickly. And there's evidence, we know this now, there's something at the end of our chromosomes called a telomere, and telomeres are indicators of aging. And it's been shown that if we're stressed, or even have thoughts, negative thoughts, prematurely shorten our telomeres as much to up to 10 years of aging in the body. So so mindfulness is a way of just being pleasantly focused and here and now, right? And that actually promotes longevity of your cells. So that's pretty amazing. We know that, if you're stressed out, or you're worrying, you're anxious, or that you're actually also, harming your immune system. Your body's not going to respond as well to fight off viruses and things like that. So, there's a lot of consequences to not being in the present moment, to worrying. So mindfulness is a really helpful way to help people feel a greater sense of tranquility and calm, even in this chaotic world that we live in.
Is it kind of like, in simple terms, like this, I'm picturing this big bag like Santa's toys. And there's all this baggage in there, you know, baggage from your childhood, baggage from your teenage years, baggage from your, say, first marriage, baggage from your job, baggage, you know, it's all bag gifts, you know, and it's like you're lugging it around
Oh gosh, yeah.
everywhere you go. And it just drags you down, keeps you down. It's like, how does a person let go of the bag and walk away from it?
Well, one important way is to notice the bags, right? And to set them down. So I had somebody that came to see me one time, and she started right off telling me, you know, my mother, she abused me, she mistreated me, and she went, I was like on and on and on with that. And I was trying to get other information from her. It's the first time I met her. And finally, about halfway through, I had to stop her. I said, you know, I appreciate you telling me that story about you and your mom, but you've repeated it several times, and I'm just curious. And of course, I do want to hear more about that as we work together. But I'm curious, have you ever tried to count how many times you tell yourself that story in the course of a day? And she stopped, and she looked at me as like, wow, you know, I have tried to count how many times I tell that story, and I always lose track. And then she said, but I do notice that when I don't tell that story, I'm a lot happier. But she had hardwired her brain. I mean, literally hardwired the circuits of her brain together so that it was very easy for her to just tell that story again and again and again. And so she needed to find a way. That was baggage right there, right? And so she needed to create new brain circuits. And one way to do that is to notice the positive things. Gratitude, for example, takes us out of our head and has us look around and see the things that are we're grateful for, that we could appreciate right now. And that will rewire your brain, because your brain wires up by what is in the field of focused attention. So you need to attend to something differently. I have a great practice. Well, it's been a very popular practice called the GLAD practice, GLAD, and it's in a lot of my books. And it's a practice for getting out of your head and to noticing the positive things. The G is to notice one thing I'm grateful for today or right now. Notice one thing I've learned. The L means learning. Did I learn something new about another person, or maybe something new about myself today? The A is an accomplishment. What one thing did I do that maybe helped me move my life forward? And by the way, it doesn't have to be a big thing. I think even getting dressed in the morning is highly underrated, and that's an accomplishment. It requires thought, follow through, right? Decision making. So, or just getting enough sleep, or attending to getting enough nutrition, enough protein throughout the day. So that's the accomplishment. And the D is delight. Notice one thing that made you smile, one thing that brought a sense of joy, one thing that maybe made you laugh today. And I remember a gentleman I worked with, he had severe depression. And I told him about this GLAD practice. And I said, I want you to try this and you know, report back to me when you come back in. So a couple of weeks later, I saw him, and here it was in the middle of winter in Portland, a lot of rain and very dreary, right? And he came back in, and I said, so tell me, how did that practice work? And he said, well, I got to the D, the delight. I heard a bird chirping that reminded me of springtime, and it gave me hope. So it was beautiful to think how this one little thing, but if he didn't have this practice, it's very structured. It got him out of his head, and it got him thinking about the positive things that he does every day that maybe he just never noticed.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that old song, Count Your Many Blessings, name them one by one, you know,
Oh
see what
yeah,
God has
yeah,
done. It's like
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Because we can get in that pit of, oh, woe is me, and forget all the great things that we have.
Oh yeah. I remember, yeah, one time I was doing a workshop. I remember, and a lady came up to me. I was talking about gratitude, and she was a nurse, and she came up to me and she said, you know, I've had a lot of depression, but then I discovered this. And she held out her hand, and on her wrist was a bracelet. And I was looking at it, and the letters from A, you know, A all through the alphabet. And I said, so what is that? She said, well, I made this. That's my gratitude bracelet. Every day I choose a letter, And then I look around at everything that I could have gratitude that begins with that letter. And that practice, she said, I actually went off medication. She said, when I started doing gratitude, she said, people they're coming to me at the hospital and would say, so you're on a new medication now, huh? You're doing a lot better. And she'd say, no, I'm on gratitude.
I've noticed something like on Facebook or people I know when they're really upset that their parent has died. And I have to tell them, and I didn't realize at first what it was doing, but I have to tell them how lucky they are. I didn't have a father that liked me. I didn't have a mother that liked me. You're so fortunate that you had this, was good Christian mother or this good kind father or whatever it was. And they'll you can just see the change. It's like, you're right. I am so fortunate. Instead of feeling like, why did I lose my dad? My dad was great or whatever it was. And they realize not everybody's had that. You just lost something that so many of us will never have known what that was like for one day to have.
Yeah. And you point out something important, that the fact that they can have that grief means that was someone they loved and cared about. And grief is kind of like you could almost think of it as a letter of love to somebody who you cared for. And there's no saying how long grief has to last. We need to leave that open for everybody's different.
Yeah. And I've had people like even on my podcast try to psychoanalyze me and say, oh, you need to like forget about the twins you lost. I was like, no, that's all I have of them. Don't take that from me. That's all I have is my grief.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And it kind of becomes like this badge of honor. I carry them with me in this heartache, and I always will. Whereas, my mom would say, Peg, why do you get so upset about those miscarriages? I just flush those things down the toilet and go on,
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm glad I'm grieving. I'm glad that, that I love them, and that, if they're in heaven watching, they know how loved, they know how often I think of them. I didn't just flush them down the toilet and say, good riddance.
Well, it's a living memorial to them, and that's a beautiful thing. And the other thing is that you're not letting it block your having joy or experiencing your life fully. Again, these aren't mutually exclusive, right? You can have the experience of connection and attachment to them and still move your life forward in a positive way.
Yeah. And I still get sad every time I see a set of twins. Always will. So
yeah,
I mean, the grief will live. So is there anything else that you wanted to discuss?
Well, I think I'd say just for the listeners out there, feel good about who you are and the courage you have for facing each day. It's not always easy, but you do have guides and you do have help out there, whether in all different kinds of ways. So I hope you can find that and continue seeking and doing positive things for others.
And practice gratitude.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Peggy.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye now.